thank you everyone for that very warm welcome, and welcome to you for coming to our announcement on the Brexit Party's defence and security policy. There are people better qualified to talk about that than I am, but I am an MEP, as you probably know, for the Brexit Party in the European Parliament. And I thought before I hand over to people who are more versed in the subject of defence than I am, I would talk a little bit about what I've learnt whilst in the European Union. One of the benefits I have of being an MEP is to sit on the budgetary committee. And apart from the budget for 2020, which has been exercising the European Union's mind a bit in view of our imminent exit, our hopefully imminent exit, has been the budget for 2021 to 2027, what they call their multi-annual financial MFF. I can't remember what the last F stands for, forgive me. But in that budget, I was absolutely shocked to see that they've allocated 21 billion euros for a European defence force. That's a 10,000 strong border force, which will operate under a European Union banner. That's not a cooperation force, that's a European Union dedicated force for the manning of the borders and to deal with internal security matters. That should make the hair on the back of your neck stand up. In addition to that, they also have 13 billion euros allocated to weapons development. You know, I used to think of the European Union as a collaborative body for trade. What is it doing with weapons development? It's an extraordinary trajectory that that institution is on. And the last couple of things I want to say is that there's something called PESCO, which is Permanent Structured Cooperation set up by the European Union, that actually only came into function in 2017, after the referendum result. And Mrs. May signed us up to that in the dying days of her premiership through a standard instrument through Parliament, without any discussion, without any proper debate. And it's even more startling when you consider that Boris Johnson vocally supported PESCO. PESCO is European Union's answer to NATO. It's their alternative to NATO. NATO has held the peace, as we know, in the European Union, in Europe, for the last 70 years, and they wish to replace it with PESCO. So the direction of travel for the European Union is not benign, as far as defence is concerned. It's actually malign. It wants, like with all things political, to take power away from member states, concentrate it in itself, and project its own power base. So having said that, it gives me great pleasure to introduce someone who knows a hell of a lot more about defence than I do. She's also been a Tory party member for 55 years. She had been a Tory MP for 23 years, and I can confirm that she will not be defecting to the Tory party anytime soon. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome to the podium Anne Widdecombe, who's also parliamentary candidate for Plymouth, Sutton and Devonport.
Please welcome to the stage, Anne Widdecombe.
How tall I've grown. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today we are setting out the defence policy that Nigel promised that we would be setting out in the week of the NATO summit. Quite simply, the Brexit Party believes that the defence of the realm is the first and the most important duty of any government. As I have always said, defence is our first social security. And that means we need a well-resourced, properly manned and fit-for-purpose defence capacity. The United Kingdom should be respected by its allies, feared by potential enemies, and above all, able to secure itself. So we will initiate a strategy-led defence review to consider future defence requirements, the size and shape and expansion of our armed forces and our intelligence services to meet whatever threats we may face in the future. That brings me to NATO. And here there is a very clear distinction between the Brexit party and the other parties. We believe that the defence cornerstone for the UK is NATO and, of course, the Five Eyes intelligence alliance. Therefore, we want to maintain our commitment to NATO of defence expenditure of 2% of GDP as an absolute minimum. Now, you may think you've heard Boris Johnson saying the same thing, but you haven't. Because the 2% that he is talking about actually includes service pensions, includes other aspects of MOD expenditure. We want to go beyond that. We want to say that, first of all, we must turn what is now 1.8% into the 2%. But then, over time, that 2% must refer to operational expenditure, not to other associated costs. That is a big difference between us and Boris Johnson. And we also believe that in the longer term, that 2% of GDP should become the core operational, as I've said, expenditure, and especially we want to see an emphasis on equipment and, as you will be hearing later, proper measures taken to protect our veterans. Nigel Farage at the policy launch said very clearly that we would be producing, in the week of the NATO summit, a very comprehensive policy for looking after our veterans, who we believe are rather neglected at the moment. The Brexit party is, of course, it goes without saying, committed to the full spectrum of deterrence. We fully support our nuclear deterrent, and we support the renewal of Trident. Jeremy Corbyn says he does, but a year before he became party leader, he said he didn't think NATO should exist. And in a very, very recent interview, he said that in any non-proliferation talks, our nuclear deterrence would have to be on the table. So in other words, he promises to renew Trident, but 5 minutes later it could be on the table in negotiations. No man can serve two masters, as one rather greater than I once said. We cannot be a part of NATO and a part of the European Defence Union. And the idea that the EU has been the ones that have kept us safe for the last 75 years is risible, quite honestly. We believe unequivocally that the UK must leave the European Defence Union. I cannot imagine what will happen to my constituency, Plymouth, which has, of course, that enormous and historic dockyard at Devonport, if we stay if we do not leave comprehensively the European Defence Union. Mrs. von der Leyen has said in terms, hasn't hinted it, she said in terms, that what she wants to see as part of European Defence Union arrangements is that there should be a single contractor. And it won't be Britain that appoints the contractor. So what will that do for British procurement? What will that do for British defence industries? What will that do for British manufacture? one single contractor. No. And this again differentiates us from Boris, because Boris will not commit to leaving comprehensively the European Defence Union to say we are going to deal wholly with NATO and to say that we will be responsible for our own contracts absolutely and utterly and without any reference to an institution which we're supposed to be leaving. Nor, of course, should we participate in any future arrangements for an EU army. And we must not allow the EU common security and defence policy to draw us into any EU policies that even remotely conflict or could even remotely undermine NATO or the Five Eyes alliance. I said earlier that we will be revealing a comprehensive package for veterans, and that will be done presently. But I just want to say that there is one issue concerning veterans which I have been bothered about for some time. And that is that on any given day, 7% of the prison population are actually military veterans. And the equivalent number is on some form of probation or community order. Critically, the Forces in Mind Trust Transition Mapping Study of 2013, we haven't made any progress, estimated that unsuccessful military transition can cost us 114 million per annum. That's the financial cost. The psychiatric and human cost is vastly worse than that. But you will be hearing the detail on that later. I would just say this. I am contesting a seat in which defence is at the heart of the constituency's survival. I have, for many years now, had a particular interest in defence issues. And when I was last fighting that same seat, in 1983 against somebody called David Owen, who fought back very successfully, when I was last fighting that same seat, I was also at that time vice chairman of Women and Families for Defence, which was an organisation specifically set up to counter CND and the women of Greenham Common. And it does rather appall me that here we are, 30 years later, and I am still having to use in my constituency the same slogan of Defend Devonport. Because yet again, our defence future is under threat. And I think that neither of the two major parties can be trusted or can be fully trusted on this issue. I would not trust Corbyn at all, and Boris Johnson is too equivocal on things like the defence union and how you calculate the 2%. So I think that a secure future for Britain actually depends on the Brexit party, and thank you very much for listening to me this morning.
Well, thank you very much, Anne. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce to you a long-serving member of our armed forces from 1978 to 2003, a Falklands veteran, the parliamentary candidate for Hyndburn, which is centred on Accrington, Gregory Butt.
Good morning. Not only am I a veteran, but I'm the great-grandson, the grandson, the son, and a very proud father of a veteran. Our collective family service stretches from the Boer War in the late 19th century to Afghanistan in the early 21st century and includes almost every single conflict. But my father did miss Korea by 2 names. And there are thousands of families like me out there, and many in and around my constituency in Hyndburn, centred around Accrington. All of us have needed support at one time or another, some more than most, and more than a few more than most, but you get my drift. But I'm not just talking about the serviceman and woman, but family members as well. And you now begin to understand the breadth and depth of the Veteran Club. And this clan, according to research by the Royal British Legion, amounts to 6.2 million of our fellow citizens. Now, I left the army some time ago, but I'm still in regular contact with the comrades that I fought with in the Falklands. And a group of us recently undertook a return trip to the South Atlantic. It was my first visit back there since 1982. 7 of us set off, thanks to the Falklands Veterans Foundation, for a week's visit just before the election was called. Not one of us anticipated quite how difficult and how emotional the experience would be. All of us at one stage or another shed tears while we were there as we revisited the windswept battlefields. I met and I talked in detail to a number of islanders that were there and lived through the conflict. And it was clear to me that these brave people understood then and are in no doubt now of the value and the price of freedom. There is a price, and we need to both accept it and address it. Now, my son's generation have faced their own battles in Iraq and Afghanistan, and this generation, are now facing the very same issues that the generations faced before them. And you'd think, wouldn't you, that we'd learnt a few lessons. And while the individual resettlement package that's offered to personnel as they leave the forces has certainly improved from my day, it needs significant improvement, alongside a serious business engagement strategy that will enable our brilliant, quite brilliant young men and women to develop their extraordinary life skills to the benefit of those businesses and to society in general. And there's no doubt that while we've made a start, this learning curve is just not steep enough. More work, more effort must go into the transitioning arrangements for service personnel back into civilian life. And the fact is, if we don't look after our people, and the public see that we're not looking after our own, how can we encourage young people into our fabulous armed forces as a career of first choice? Both retention and recruitment will suffer, well, let's face it, it's happening now, isn't it? And we've got to reverse that trend. Now, we in the Brexit Party are deeply concerned that successive governments have broken the presumed covenant between civil society and those who serve on its behalf in our armed forces. We are clear that those who are put in harm's way to defend our way of life and to keep us safe should not be shortchanged on leaving the services. And to this end, we propose that the military covenant should be enshrined in law. Now, this was something that was promised by David Cameron, remember him, when he was Prime Minister, but it was not delivered then, and it's not been delivered since. That we will bring legislation forward to prevent serving personnel and veterans from being pursued by the police and prosecutors for actions that they undertook in good faith while they were in the service of the Crown. The legislation will not excuse or protect the deliberate breaking of national or international law, nor compromise the absolute requirement for military personnel to protect civilians. That MOD land should be sold to generate funds or given over for the building of homes for former service personnel. And we can look to the great examples of this in Plymouth and in Hull, where it's already started. But we need more of these schemes. It is clearly not fair that veterans should be at the back of the housing queue, and that also got to change soon. Also, that a properly constituted and formalised veterans ID card scheme be introduced that will provide instant verification of a veteran's service, particularly when accessing government or third sector support, whilst also providing a tangible link and an emotional link back to the armed forces. That the Tri-Service Defence Holistic Transition Policy, bit of a mouthful, but it's an important document, of December 2018 be fully endorsed, which will support both the service person and the service family. Remember that collective of the service clan. And in line with the Single Defence Holistic Transition Policy, we will create a new organisation called Defence Transition Services. And this will help the individuals struggling with transition to civilian life and provide the clear guidance to employers on the added benefits and the absolute value of employing ex-service personnel. Now, nothing in this world happens in a vacuum. And unless we rebalance how we look after our veterans and their families, we risk losing the hitherto unshakable link between our armed forces and civil society. The military covenant needs to be protected in law. We need to act now, and we need to act with purpose. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gregory. And for our final speaker, who is the parliamentary candidate for Plymouth South, the flagship naval base for the United Kingdom, John Kennedy. Portsmouth South.
Ben thought that I wouldn't notice that. Indeed. It's a pleasure to be here from Portsmouth South, home of the Royal Navy, and a constituency where, like me, people see that defence has been the forgotten issue at this general election. It's been forgotten by the legacy parties, forgotten even though for the first time in a generation we now face the threat that the United Kingdom could have an anti-war unilateralist Prime Minister by Friday the 13th of December. And if we did, Jeremy Corbyn wouldn't need an envelope for the letter of last resort. That letter would have one word written on it, and the Russians or anyone else who may be our potential adversary would know what that word would say. It would say surrender. Jeremy Corbyn may have established hotlines to many of those who are our potential adversaries, but the problem with those hotlines is that they only take one-way calls. There is no threat that Jeremy Corbyn can make that will ever be taken seriously in our defence were he to become Prime Minister. And that's why I, as the candidate in Portsmouth South, and everybody in Portsmouth South, thinks that defence should be a key issue in this general election. But neither the Conservatives nor the Labour Party have wanted to talk about this because, to varying degrees, this capacity has been neglected, this essential capacity to defend our nation. Labour failed to spend what was necessary, and whilst the Conservatives are making slow headway towards the 2% of GDP commitment, our armed forces have still been neglected. We need to maintain the push towards 2% of GDP for core operational expenditure and pay for what was decided in 2015 with no more reductions. And the Brexit Party is working to that objective. We have a woefully unbalanced foreign policy where our armed forces have been underfunded, yet DFID has been burning through money. Our surface fleet is too small. We don't currently, for example, have the capacity to cover our own coastal waters obligations and also our commitments overseas without third-party support. In the event of any conflict or threat of conflict with peer or near-peer nations, our carriers would have to go home and sit in home base because they are not protectable unless they are surrounded by a US fleet. And they have no protection against ship-busting ballistic missiles. And this comes when on Tuesday of next week, HMS Prince of Wales, our second aircraft carrier, will be commissioned in Portsmouth. We should have 12 Type 45 destroyers operational. We have 6 due to the reduction in expenditure. We want our naval yards working fully as they used to. We want to build and maintain ships in the United Kingdom in the future, and both of our aircraft carriers should become, or should be able to become, and have the capacity to be fully operational at one time, given the unpredictable threat that we face globally. But we also have a duty to our forces and their morale, and the morale in the armed forces, which has slipped. We need to ensure that as much effort and support is given to retention as it is to recruitment. We need to recognise that cuts to pay by removing the overseas allowance and the Forces Help to Buy scheme has impacted on our loyal servicemen who sacrifice enough to serve. We need to properly equip our personnel for life outside the forces, to boost resettlement schemes by a generational update that includes improving educational opportunities while people are serving, for those that want to study for civilian qualifications to equip them once they have served and leave and return to civilian life. But most importantly, we need to urgently review, as has been said, the support that we give to veterans, who often, through the effects of active service, need greater support than they are currently offered when returning to civilian life. We need to follow them and give them the back that they have given us during their terms of service. We have an obligation to our Navy, to our Army and Air Force. That obligation needs to match the dedication that they have given to us. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, John, prospective candidate for Portsmouth South. Ladies and gentlemen, any questions? And if there are questions, can I suggest you direct them to an individual on the panel that you'd like to address them to, rather than generally? But if it's a general question, I'm happy to take that as well. Yes. Yeah, that's you. Is there a microphone? There's one here, but we might need that.
No, give it to him, because otherwise we can't hear the question.
Good morning, everybody. Tim Cooper from the British Forces Broadcasting Service, Forces TV. A couple of questions, really. The Veterans Pledge, if I can call it that, you say it says that people that put themselves in harm's way for our country should not be short-changed. Surely that should apply then to the police, our nurses, our fire service personnel, and all of those people that do, and we've seen very recently, put themselves in harm's way for our country. And secondly, you get to spend a lot of money here by the sound of it. Where's that money coming from? You mentioned selling off a bit of MOD land, but other than that, there's nothing on money.
And would you like to?
Yeah. Thank you. This is a defence policy announcement, and that is why we have concentrated on defence personnel. And we have said very clearly that we do not think it is fair that people who act, taking immediate decisions in situations of conflict, should then find that 30 years later they're being prosecuted, particularly given, and I speak with feeling, as I lost friends in the Brighton bomb and narrowly missed it myself, I speak with feeling, particularly as we let the IRA prisoners out as part of a peace process. Then as part of that same peace process, we should be consider it for the other side as well. On the subject of money, first of all, as you will appreciate, there will be a commitment if we were to become embroiled in the European Defence Union, and one of the reasons why we want to get right out, though it's not the main reason is to stay committed wholly to NATO. But one of the benefits of getting out will be that we won't have liabilities there. Secondly, there are at the moment, as you will well know, if your force is broadcasting, umpteen different committees, all dealing with umpteen different things. And a certain amount of rationalisation will help. But then, of course, the policies themselves save money. The 114 million that we're spending on the lack of coordination in military transition could be saved and spent productively on actually helping veterans rather than locking them up when things go wrong. So you've heard us say that we're going to go for the 2%. We didn't say that by Tuesday afternoon we would have put all of that into operations. We have said that is what we will do incrementally, and the other two parties aren't committed to that. So that's where the money's coming from. And actually, if you analyse what we've said, you'll find that we haven't promised vast tracts of expenditure which aren't actually countered by what we're spending at the moment and shouldn't be.
Would you agree with me that the purpose of PESCO is to put down situations like Catalan and Paris, which the mainstream media are ignoring, as a force of oppression?
Look, I'm talking today about defence and about defending ourselves against our enemies. I mean, obviously there are pockets of trouble, not only in the world, but, as you rightly said, in the EU itself. But we've always said to the EU, do not interfere in our national affairs. And that actually means that we do have to reciprocate unless things get completely out of hand. So we want comprehensively to leave the EU, not with one foot in and one foot out, which is what the Boris deal does, and then we will be free of any oppression, and they can answer for what they do to those that they do it to.
Good. the lady with the cap.
Hi, Anne. I love the sound of defense transitional services, which you are trying to boost, which I think is especially in the mental health and also our other aspects. I want to understand whether you will work, because recently this NATO summit just finished. All the NATO alliance has agreed to increase of 2%, from 2% to spending even more in the alliance, which make me wonder whether it's a possibility that you think it's a good idea to work in conjunction for these transitional services, to work in conjunction with NATO alliance as well as our international development department, that kind of strategy. Do you think that will be one of your things?
Well, look, first of all, when we're talking about what we're doing in conjunction with our NATO allies, it is a crying disgrace that only the USA, Greece, and the UK, I mean Greece of all countries, actually pay their full NATO dues. So poor strapped cash Greece pays up, Germany does not pay its full dues. That is quite wrong. And so the first thing I would say about cooperation with our NATO allies is they must pay their full dues as well. Do you want to say anything from the veteran? Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Sorry. It was only that.
Did you want to add anything, gentlemen, to that answer?
Do you want to add in?
No. Okay.
No. Okay.
So there's a gentleman at the back, standing up. Can I ask people to announce who they are when they ask their questions? So over to you.
Certainly, thank you. I'm Professor Gwyddion Prinz. I'm the academic board member of Veterans for Britain. Mr. Chairman, it is of course completely true that under Mrs. May, after the United Kingdom voted to leave the to leave the European Union, we were signed in to many, many aspects of the developing defence union. As you may recall, I and our colleagues came to talk to you about that in Strasbourg.
I do.
But with respect, I must clarify a mistake. We are not signed in to PESCO. We were not signed in to PESCO by Mrs. May, and Mr. Johnson's deal has changed fundamentally from the May deal. Specifically, Article 104, which was completely toxic and would have put us under EU defence control without any choice through the mechanism of the backstop, has been removed. Article 102 in the Johnson deal contains the crucial word consider, which of course means that we have to do nothing. So it pains me to have to make an intervention on fact, but please let us not be under an illusion. The Johnson deal offers a narrow and hard pathway which would lead us to freedom, but it would enable us to do so.
Right. Let's stick to fact. Article 102, in layman's language, makes it an opt-in rather than an opt-out. But Boris will not commit to not opting in. That is the whole point. He won't commit to that. And that is the great problem with the Boris deal. It enables this, that, and the other thing, but it does not commit us to a particular course. And that is why I say that deal is 1 foot in and 1 foot out. And I say this also, that if the Conservatives win the general election and that deal goes through, in 2 or 3 years' time, when we are still being told by our political masters that we cannot do this or we must do that because of EU rules, the public will be scratching its head and saying, but I thought we'd left. If he doesn't want us in the defence union, why doesn't he stand up and say that unequivocally?
Gentleman at the front, member of the press.
The mic's coming.
Thank you. Kemal Rijken, Groene Amsterdammer from Amsterdam, Netherlands. I have a question for you. Of course, you are against the European Defence Union.
Yes.
But can you understand why Chancellor Merkel and President Macron want this? Because it has to do with the Trump administration and the fact that, Europe is being left alone.
They wanted this long before Trump came on the scene. They want a Europe. They want a European superstate. And if you have a state, you need an army. You need an overarching defence policy. That is what you have with a state. It has a flag, it has an anthem, it has a budget, and now it wants an army. And the answer should be no.
I think we'll take 1 or 2 more questions if there are any. Any
One
more?
or two.
Well, one. One more question.
Be unequivocal.
One question at the back.
Hello, my name's Ed. I came in a bit late, so I missed it. Did you say anything specifically about homelessness in veterans?
Yes. Veterans, you're on.
Well, we did, and it's a serious issue, and we need to address it. I mean, I think that we can raise some money for this by, I don't know whether you caught this, by selling off MOD land. I mean, there are some great projects in line that have happened in Plymouth, and there's one in line in Hull. One is a self-build for veterans coming out. We're doing it. We're going to do it. We need more effort, and we need more urgency. But, you know, we will get the funds from selling off the MOD land. We'll use some of that land, and we'll address this issue absolutely face on.
You want me to round up?
Yeah, I'll just ask Anne to round up. Yeah, thank you very much, Anne. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. Right, the essence of today is we have a choice in our future between two masters, between the EU and NATO. And we are unequivocally saying NATO every time. NATO and the Five Eyes Alliance. We are saying that you cannot trust the other parties to go unequivocally down that route. And today I challenge Boris Johnson, I challenge him to say publicly through the media that he will never, ever commit us to the European Defence Union where there is the smallest possibility that that might compromise what we are doing with NATO. And if he will not say that, then all I can say is you cannot trust the Conservatives with the future of our defences. And it's worth pointing out that both major parties, over a couple of decades, have been running down our armed services, running down our equipment. I mean, you would have thought they'd learnt from as long ago as the Falklands War, where they were busy selling off frigates, then suddenly found they needed them. And you would have thought they would have learnt from that. And while I'm the first to say that, yes, it made sense after the end of the Cold War to reduce our capacity, that made sense. But the extent to which we've taken it now leaves us hugely vulnerable. And NATO keeps the peace through one straightforward means. Because the basic tenet of NATO, as you all will know, is that if one of us is attacked, we all consider ourselves attacked. So should there ever be an attack on our homeland, the President of the United States will say that the United States has been attacked. And that is what has kept the peace, and we would be fools, absolute fools, to leave the European Union and yet stay somehow in its defence union. No, 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 we're off and we're staying in NATO.